good afternoon. Ooh, that scared my puppy.
Oh, Chair Walker, I just wanted to make sure when we get started, folks know that means we're going to be live streaming and recording.
All right. So we're going to mind our P's and Q's today. All right. Well, welcome to the South Slough Reserve Management Commission, July 15, 2021. This is the 159th regular meeting of the Management Commission, and we are not going to let you down today. I reviewed the packet early this morning because I was having trouble sleeping, so I got up and I was so excited about what I read. So know that you're going to be pleased with what you hear today. Let's go ahead and do a round of introductions and make sure that we have all of our members accounted for. Chief Brainerd, you're with us?
I'm here today.
Awesome. Good to see you. Dr. Bob Cowan, I saw you on the screen at one point.
And just a quick reminder that I unfortunately have to step off at 2. So if there's any voting, hopefully we can do it before then.
I don't see any vote. I didn't see any voting on our agenda, so it's mostly informational today. All right, great. Trent Hatfield.
He is unable to join us. He let us know ahead of time.
Okay, all right. Dave Kromsteiner.
Oh, I just received an email from him that he's unable to join us.
All right, okay. Bob Main.
He also is not here. He was unable to join us.
All right. Lonnie Mays, we know you're with us. And Maya. Maya Watts.
Maya, can you check your audio again? I didn't hear you when you were talking.
Nope.
Well, I didn't think she was going to answer because I called her Maya instead of Maya, but I figured that out. And I know she's here. All right. And then Chris Wall, I saw you here.
I'm here. Hi, everyone.
Oh, yeah. Maya says that she's going to work on it and her mute is off. So, all right. Terrific. And I wanted to let you all know that Chris Wall from NOAA has been officially reappointed by the governor. We have 2 other positions that have been up, expired, let's say that, and we're awaiting the governor's signature on those. So Trent Hatfield's term is up, and Dave Kromsteiner. Nope, it's not Trent. It's Dave Kromsteiner and Bob Main. Trent is up next year. So we appreciate that both those folks continue to serve until we get appointments made to replace them. So with that, we have meeting minutes from our last meeting, which was April 30, 2021. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Okay, thank you, Bob. And is there a second?
I saw Maya also moved, but we couldn't hear her. So I believe she's seconding.
Okay. All right. Any discussion about the minutes? Any changes? All right. All those then in favor of accepting the minutes as produced by Catherine Andreessen, who does a great job, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right. The minutes are approved. All right. This is our chance for public input. Bree, did you have anyone submit a desire to appear and speak before the commission today?
I did not. Kathy, did you?
I did not. No, I received no requests.
Okay. And I don't see anyone else on the screen.
There is someone, Samantha. I'm not sure who that person is.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear Maya. Great.
We can hear you, Maya.
I am invited. She's a new graduate student, and I wasn't sure what the live streaming was, but I knew it was open to the public, so I hoped it was okay that another OMB person attended.
Yes.
Absolutely.
She was curious as she's just starting in Aaron's lab.
All right. I learned from reading this great packet that Kathy put together that all those labs have the names of people. So I'm going to have to get an education about why that is. But anyway, we'll move on. We have a little bit of old business to talk about. Bree, do you want to give the legislative updates?
Sure. So in your packet, there's a summary of legislative updates. It's old business agenda item 1, and I'll just briefly go through it. So Senate Bill 126, if you'll remember, was submitted to the Oregon legislature in 2021 to amend Oregon Revised Statute 273.553 so that lands managed by the reserve that are located north of Volcano Island can be included in future expansions of the reserve's administrative boundary. It's important to note that this bill doesn't change the boundary. It just allows us to bring in these extra lands that we've acquired. So we're starting to work with NOAA on that process to amend the boundary. A complete history of the measure was provided in your April packets. Since your April meeting, the bill passed the House and was signed by the governor on June 1st. So the law will go into effect next year, January 1st, 2022. So great news. We're very excited about it. It means we can expand our boundary to include all the lands that we manage in the South Slough area. So big thank you to all the folks who are involved in that and making that happen.
And I understand you've already met with the port of Coos Bay to begin the conversation about our outreach and how we're going to start that process.
Yep.
Because it will require public engagement. Not only does it require it, we desire it, so that people can have a chance to learn more about what we're doing. And I also think as we go through the presentations today, especially on the green crab research, you're going to find how valuable what we do at the South Slough is to our economy, but also to the oyster community, the oyster beds, the crabs, the fisheries. So I'm just really excited about it, and going out and looking at the expansion of the boundary is going to help us tell more people about our story here at South Slough. So very excited.
I'll also note that we are in the process of starting to update our management plan, which is the 5-year plan that guides our priorities. And NOAA is currently trying to determine if a boundary expansion will happen in conjunction with our management plan update. Recently, those two processes were separated, but since we're actually about to start both, there's a chance they may be recoupled. So the November meeting, I will be providing an update on our process for the management plan, as well as the boundary adjustment and the outreach that we have planned. So big year ahead of us. We're excited. The second piece of the legislative updates I wanted to just share was following up on Senate Bill 5539. So this was the bill that was submitted to Oregon's legislative session for 2021. And it's the proposed budget for the Department of State Lands and includes funding for the South Slough Reserve. It passed the Senate on June 16th, and it passed the House on June 22nd. So budget is moving ahead for DSL, including the funding for the reserve. So big thank you to Director Walker for her testimony and presentations around that, and keeping us funded. It's nice.
You're quite welcome. The governor has not yet signed the bill. There's a number of budget bills she has yet to sign. So we're officially on a continuing resolution, which is really quite normal. And nothing to worry about. But we did well in our budget, and as usual, the subcommittee responded heartily to information about South Slough. And I was in Alexandria, Virginia during the hearings, and my daughter's birds provided a lot of a cacophony of sound during the hearings. Even when I put a blanket or a cover over their cage, they just seemed to like my voice and add their voices to it. So it was quite an interesting hearing. But we made it, and everything was great. So thank you. And thank you, Bree, for providing information that we could put in the budget presentation that made it shine. All right. That's it for legislative updates.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a land acquisition update to talk about. Very
Okay,
exciting.
Yeah, I'll provide that as well. So old business agenda item 2 is in your packet. The reserve is working to purchase a 0.56 acre property that's privately owned property at the entrance to the visitor center. And in your packets, Appendix A shows where this property is located. So you'll see those 2 blue highlighted parcels. The 1.14 acre parcel is owned by Coos County, and we are working towards purchasing that. The administrative update in your packet mentions we will be closing in July, and I have an update. We will actually be closing in September on that parcel, but things are still going as planned. The timeline just got extended. So this update, though, is for the 0.56 acre adjacent property adjacent to the county parcel. And just to remind you all that the Management Commission approved purchasing both of these properties in November of 2019. The State Land Board approved the Department of State Lands moving forward with due diligence on both these properties in June of 2020. We're just kind of moving along with these acquisitions. Because we don't have funding currently available for the smaller parcel, I've been working with the Department of Justice to understand what kind of purchasing agreements we can put in place that would allow us time to raise funding. And so we are working on putting together an option agreement with the owner that would allow us to secure the exclusive right to purchase the property over the next 1.5 years. So the timeline would be, we would have until October 31st, 2022 to purchase the property. And I want to note that the Friends of South Slough is committed to helping with this. So they're providing funding. In your packet, there's a letter that they submitted to Director Walker committing funding in the amount of $4,000 for a down payment on the property, and then committing to helping us raise funding for the remaining amount. So we don't have a signed agreement yet, but we're developing that agreement, and I've been communicating with the landowner. And so we seem to be moving along as we need to. So any questions from the commission about that?
I'll just ask, what's the total cost expected?
40,000.
40, okay. I missed that. Thank you.
So that's quite a commitment on FOSS's part to help us raise funds to purchase the property. And I appreciate that the property owner is willing to do it on a sale agreement that gives us time to do that. Right, any other questions for Ms. Yednock? All right, we'll conclude with old business and move on to new business. And fantastic presentations today. Bree, I think you're right out of the gate with the economic contribution study. When I read through that, I felt like I was in my economic 101 class from the University of Oregon, so many years ago. So it was really great to read about the difference between an economic contribution, what was it, an economic contribution and an economic benefit. That's right. So there's a distinction. It's a distinction with a difference. And I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about this report. We had hoped to present the report to the land board in August when they meet, but that meeting is going to be a very short meeting, as is rather typical for August. So we will bring part of this report, a shortened version, to the land board in October, when we're going to have an annual report from Ms. Yudnock about the South Slough. I decided, as director of DSL and chair of the management commission, I have a lot of power here. And as part of that power, I want to inform the land board and people who care about what we do. And we have from time to time brought information in front of the land board about what the South Slough does. But every other department area in the Department of State Lands does a presentation to the land board at some time during the year. So I felt that South Slough could do that, and it would be of benefit to us. And so we will roll this economic contribution report into that. But there has been a lot of communications effort around this economic contribution study so that people know what the drivers were and what the results were. And so with that, Bree, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can talk about all the great things they had to say in this report.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I think you're all seeing the end of my presentation. Let me start at the beginning. Okay, are you all seeing the slide with the title?
Yep.
Great. Perfect. Okay, so I am very excited to share this presentation with you about a recently published study that was commissioned by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. And it offers just kind of a glimpse into the significant economic contribution that South Slough Reserve makes to Coos County and the state of Oregon economies. The study was led by a team of economists. This is definitely outside my wheelhouse. So we brought in the economists, and it took over a year to complete. And the ultimate goal was to help NOAA and the National Estuarine Research Reserve System as a whole better understand the economic contribution that reserves across the country are making for their communities. So essentially how the money associated with reserves ripples through the local economy with the presence of a reserve. So first, I'll just acknowledge the project team. Of course, it was led by NOAA with funding from the Pew Charitable Trusts. And then a bulk of the analysis work was done by a team of economists at the Eastern Research Group, or ERG. And then the reserve, we as a reserve and staff provided data to the team and helped review multiple drafts of the report. So I'll also note there's a link to the full report in the agenda item in your packet, and then Kathy included a printed copy in the hard copies of the packet she sent out. So if you've read it, you'll know that the report includes results for 3 reserves in Florida, as well as South Slough. But for today, I'm just going to focus on South Slough Reserve, the results associated with us. Okay, so the study measured the economic contribution of our reserve to both Coos County and the state of Oregon. And for an economic contribution study, it really looks at 3 different types of spending. So direct spending by the reserve and visitors, and this includes spending by the reserve to support operations like purchasing supplies and hiring contractors. And so, for example, we paid a local contractor to manufacture the bridge that's shown in this picture here that was recently installed on the Hidden Creek Trail. And direct spending by visitors, that includes things like meals at restaurants that they're buying or paying for lodging when they come visit the area. So that's all the direct spending by the reserve and visitors. The second measure of an economic contribution is indirect spending. And so this includes funds by contractors, or funds that contractors and suppliers are spending. So for our bridge example in this picture, indirect spending would include spending by the contractor on the materials to construct the bridge and the labor to construct the bridge. So in a sense, that's the first ripple of economic contribution into the economy. The third type of spending that's included is induced spending, and this refers to things like reserve employees and contracted employees spending their earned income in the local economy at places like restaurants and grocery stores and retail stores. And so all three of these types of spending contribute revenue as well as jobs to the local economies. So the reserve staff met with the project team several times over the course of the study to provide data. And this slide is showing the types of data that we provided. So we provided information on what the reserve spends across a 5-year period, as well as spending by the Friends of South Slough. So we worked with FOSS to look at their budget and spending. And as you all know, FOSS is a nonprofit that helps support our programs. And then staff also provided direct counts of visitors that came to the reserve in 2018 and 2019. Because this study was happening during COVID and we were closed, we didn't include the year we were closed. So we were looking at just sort of a normal year of visitation. And these visitors are counted when they come to education programs or reserve events, or when they walk through the door at the visitor center to explore our exhibits. And on average, we see about 10,000 visitors coming to the reserve. There's an asterisk on this slide because there are a few notes about visitors. So the number of visitors that come to the reserve is likely greater than 10,000, which is just the number we can count. We're not able to count everybody who is out hiking on the trails or paddling in the slough. The second important thing to note is that we don't have direct data on what visitors are spending. So the project team used data from existing studies at similar natural areas to calculate visitor spending. And this is standard practice for these kinds of studies. So those data were entered into an input-output model. And then the outputs of this economic model calculate the total monetary contribution, so the direct, indirect, and induced spending, as well as the number of jobs that are supported by the presence of the reserve. So here are the results. The reserve contributes over $6.1 million to the Coos County economy annually, and it supports about 65 jobs in Coos County. And if you expand spending out to the state at a broader level, that contribution is even larger at 7.2 million. And what's really important to note is that nearly 70% of the reserve's annual spending is through grants. So this is funding that our talented and dedicated staff bring in from outside the area to support projects, research projects, work that includes internships for folks to participate and assist with science and education programs, and a bunch of various projects throughout the reserve. So that grant funding amounts to about $1 million a year that our staff are able to bring in. And if we want to look at the breakdown of how this looks with visitors versus reserve spending, this slide is zooming in for Coos County. And on the left side of this slide, you're seeing a pie that is the $6.1 million contributed to the Coos County economy. 5.3 million of that is from reserve spending, and about 850,000 is from visitor spending. The right side of the slide is showing the jobs that are generated or supported. So South Slough spending supports 56 jobs in Coos County, and visitor spending supports an additional 10. So this study clearly shows that South Slough Reserve provides valuable economic contributions to the community. And it really is great to see these numbers because it's critical for us to understand how we enhance the local economy. But it's really also critical to note that the study doesn't reflect all the values and the contributions that the reserve is providing. So for example, we also contribute to a resilient economy by monitoring and managing healthy waterways, wetlands, and forests. We know that our water quality monitoring program shows that we have clean water. Having a reserve in your estuary protects clean water, and in turn can support a thriving oyster aquaculture industry. Our staff also implement stewardship activities to maintain and restore healthy ecosystems that provide habitat for commercially and recreationally important species like salmon and Dungeness crabs. Our science team also conducts research projects that contribute applied information, applied science, to contribute to our understanding of how natural and human-built systems will respond to projected sea level rise and other impacts of climate change. And then this knowledge that we're gaining through our science program is helping inform coastal management. And then finally, there's just the long-term intrinsic value of the reserve being here for nearly 50 years. And so these values are impossible to quantify. You can't put a dollar on it, but we often hear about it. Teachers often share positive impact of bringing their schools out for field trips to the reserve, the positive impact that has on their students and their learning. We have kids who have grown up going to summer camp with us, and they're now actually working as interns in summer camp. So it was an impactful experience for them to be able to participate in camp throughout their lives. We also have visitors who talk to us regularly about coming out to hike the trails with their kids and their grandkids to pass on the information that they learned through their trips to the reserve. So these are just some added values that can't be included in an economic study. And then the last point I wanted to make is I wanted to acknowledge the roles of our invaluable community partners. Partners like the Friends of South Slough and the Oregon Institute of Marine Biology and South Coast Tours, which is an ecotourism company that leads paddle trips in the reserve. So these organizations also help bring visitors to the area, provide volunteers and interns for our programs, and in doing so, expand the awareness of the reserve and help enhance our economic contribution to the region. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have them or hear comments. Let me go ahead and stop sharing.
Here we go. Thank you, Bree. That was an excellent report. I encourage you all to read about the other reserves too that have a much larger contribution to their communities, but that's because they're in Florida, where there's a whole lot of people in Florida. So I think relative to the size of our community, it is a big push and a big amount of money that we contribute to the community through the South Slough. I also wanted to point out to the commission in the report on page 25, it's under reserve operations data. It says the reserve provided a very detailed categorized budget that included the percentage to the nearest 1% of what was spent within the study area. Now that's got Rebecca Muse written all over it, our operations manager here at South Slough. And I just want to commend her for keeping such fabulous books that we were able to provide this kind of data. So that tells you even more that the data was spot on. Nothing was made up here other than some of the estimates about visitors viewing wildlife and paddling and hiking. And that was done all to economic standards. So I just want to thank Rebecca for her leadership and for Bree's leadership, and the staff, the entire staff has just made this work like a charm. And you're going to hear more about what they've all been up to as we move through the reports. But I'd like to open it up to any questions from the commission. Are you curious about any of it? Are you excited about it? Are you surprised by it? Bob Cowan, I see your hand up.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a good report and presentation of it too, Bree. A nice summary. The context that you brought up, Vicki, about Florida being larger, but it's a much larger place. Is there a way of getting a per capita contribution or a percentage of the total regional or this is for Coos Bay? Is it, how much of it relative to the Florida environment? My guess is that this is probably on a per capita basis, a larger impact than it would have in Florida. And that's, I think, would be worthy of knowing, which would be something to brag about.
Yeah, thank you for that question and comment. One thing I'll point out is that this was just a pilot study that NOAA was getting started. They do want to expand this out to more reserves in the system, and so I can provide that feedback and see if there's a way to get those calculations. The reserves in Florida, if you look at their visitation numbers, it is fascinating. They have like 250,000 people every year that come to their reserves. I think Coos County has 65,000 people total. So it's just like a completely different scale. So one really important point that was mentioned in the study is that it's not truly for comparison. It's not this reserve's better than that reserve, kind of thing. And that context is really, really important to think about. And yeah, so I can pass that on to the team at NOAA, because I know they're looking into digging in a little deeper on this across the system.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I do think that for the size of our community, it is tremendous contribution. And you can't compare our reserve to anyone else's reserve. We're very rural. And it's just a different type of reserve. So I think what they did was great. And I think you're right that we might, Bree will add that information to NOAA when they go about studying the other reserves and see if that's something that can be called out a little bit more in the reports. But I was really pleased. Anyone else have a question? Chief Brainerd?
I hope to God we never have that many people come through.
200,000?
Yeah. That's too many people.
Yeah.
It'd be a very different stewardship model we'd have to be working with. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't imagine that many cars on Seven Devils Road. All right. Maya, are you speaking or are you still muted?
Situation.
No, there you are.
Thanks for the patience on the front end. But yeah, I think too that I feel like, being on the East Coast a lot, especially in places that are close to metropolitan areas, is there's maybe 2 parks to go to, right? Where I feel like in Oregon, we have the luxury of spreading out a bit and there's not a head count every time we go hiking or something like that. Whereas if you live in the city, you've got 2 nearby parks and those reserves probably get hit heavily by that.
Well, I think during COVID, we actually had an increase. The reserve staff counted the number of vehicles in the parking lot because the visitor center has been closed, but there has been an increase in the number of vehicles and the number of people out on the trails. And you can go for hikes without worrying about breathing on someone and picking up COVID. So that's been really great to see. And I see, Rebecca, you look like you're unmuted.
Nope, nothing from me.
All right. Well, thank you for those fine details down to the less than 1%.
I also just want to, oh, go ahead, Rebecca, sorry.
It definitely helped that the accounting staff in Salem keep such good records as well. So I was able to pull the majority of it from their system and then trickle down through it to what we needed to do. So it definitely helped having DSL keep good records as well.
Well, that's great to hear. Lonnie, you are unmuted. Did you have anything?
I wanted to be able to comment that this is something that when Laura and I were very active in FOSS, we were always trying to bring forth to everyone in the community, especially the business community that we spoke to, was the great untapped resource in ecotourism that the South Slough represented, and that we were trying to make people aware of that. There's just a great untapped resource, and that there was all of this economic benefit that it was already bringing to the community.
And that, thank you for that. And that was mentioned in the report also for all of the reserve studies about the ecotourism that brings to the community and to the reserve. So yeah, this is great. I'm so glad we were a part of the pilot project. Do I see anyone else? I don't see raised hands, so I'm just looking for anyone who's unmuted. I don't see any more. So thank you, Bree.
I just had one more comment, though. I
one
did
more
want to
comment.
recognize, we talked about Rebecca providing the great data. I also wanted to recognize Kathy Andreasen, Deborah Rudd, and Jamie Bellinger were really a lot of the investigative team in terms of tracking down all the data for this. So they really did a great job getting us to where we are with this report. So thank you to them too.
And I congratulate them. And I did read in the report that while the researchers did not visit the reserve in person because of COVID, there were several meetings with staff. So I'm assuming those are the fine people you just mentioned. So great. All right, thank you. And before we get into the next item under new business, the green crab research and monitoring, I failed to have the staff introduce themselves. And so I want to go back and make sure we have that opportunity. So let me scroll through my screen. I see Rebecca first. So Rebecca, you want to introduce yourself to the world and what your role is?
Yep, Rebecca Muse, and I'm the operations manager. I run the grants, accounting, and the facilities.
Great, thank you. Allie, you're next on my screen.
Hi, I'm Allie Helms, the ESTR monitoring coordinator, and I coordinate our SWAMP program, the system-wide monitoring program.
Great, thank you. And Sean Schooler, you're next.
Hello, I'm the research coordinator at the reserve.
Let's see, Maya, we already know. Chris, I don't think I introduced you. You were, you're part of the commission.
Chris Wall with NOAA's Office for Coastal Management. My office is the one that works in partnership with the reserve on implementation, although it's a different staff member than me. There's a different person from our West Coast team who works directly with the reserve on a day-to-day basis. But I work with the Oregon Coastal Management Program and then West Coast wide as well through my role in the office, and enjoy the collaborative perspective of being able to be on the commission here.
Great, thank you. I apologize for not doing this earlier. I've been on a lot of conference calls this week that have been 3 and 4 hours long, and you sort of get Zoom-eyed after a while. All right, next on my screen is Alice Yates.
Hi, I'm Alice Yates. I'm the stewardship coordinator at the reserve.
Thank you. Jamie Bellinger.
I'm Jamie. I'm the education coordinator at the reserve.
And the reserve's in your background. I see that. And Sabra Comet.
Hi, I'm Sabra. I'm the coastal training program coordinator at the reserve.
Oh, wow, what a beautiful background. Where are you? Are you at the reserve? Oh, I can't hear you. You're muted.
It's a batik style tapestry I have in my kitchen.
Oh my word, it's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Samantha, you are our guest today. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Samantha. I'm an incoming graduate student at the Oregon Institute of Marine Biology, and I plan to apply for the Davidson Fellowship in the winter.
Great. Well, welcome. Glad to have you. We have our DSL IT staff, and then I see Catherine.
Hi, administrative assistant.
All right, thank you. Did I capture everyone today? We have much more staff, but they're not all with us on the call today. All right. Well, thank you all for introducing yourselves. And my goodness sakes, we're going to go into this European green crab research and monitoring. study. And I suspect that Sean is going to lead that conversation. I see that Sylvia Yamada and Kathy Andreessen were also involved in the production of the study. And Sean, this was an amazing report to read. So I'm really anxious for you to share that with our commission today and our listeners.
All right, yeah, good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to show you some of our interesting data here. So I'm going to talk about green crabs in Coos Bay, and Bree is going to forward the slides for me. So next slide. So basically a summary is we're going to talk about green crabs, a bit of a background on what they are and how to identify them. Then we're going to look into some of the research we've been doing, the monitoring of the green crabs in Coos Bay. Then talk a little bit about the impacts and a little bit about potential management. So next slide. So the green crab invasion, I don't know if everybody follows green crab stuff, but basically they came from Western Europe there, the blue area you can see along the coasts of France and Netherlands all the way up into Norway, around Great Britain there. And they've invaded all these other places around the world. The red spots are the areas that they've invaded and are currently occupying. The green areas are where potential habitat based upon the temperatures and the habitat there. And the black dots are where they've been found, but they haven't invaded yet. So that's probably not good habitat for them, but they have been found in those areas. So if you look along the west coast of the United States, you can see that all the way from mid-California up into Canada and even potentially up into Alaska as the potential area of invasion. Next slide. So when they got to Coos Bay through San Francisco, and so they moved from the east coast to the west coast into San Francisco Bay, and they were first found there in about 1989. And these crabs, they are brooded by the female crab, and then the eggs are hatched and are released as small planktonic organisms that float around in the plankton called zoea. And then they move out of the estuary into the current. And in this case, you mostly think about the currents going north to south along the coast. But in fact, we have a countercurrent during the winter called the Davidson Current. And so they happen to come out in the winter as zoea out of the San Francisco estuary into that current, then up along the coast of Oregon. And then all along the coast, they come into the estuaries as these little planktonic floating stage. Then they turn into megalopy and they settle down in the estuaries and then grow for about a year to reach sexual maturity. And so there's a year juvenile phase, young of the year they call it. And then after that, they live another 5 years or so as adults and produce eggs each year, up to 200,000 eggs per individual female per year. So a lot of eggs that they release and have little zoea then coming from those. Next slide. Identification. So there's a pretty easy way to tell the green crabs apart. Just remember 5 spines or 5 marginal teeth on each side of the eyes. None of our other crabs have that. They aren't always green, so green isn't a good way to tell. Often they can actually be kind of a reddish color or a yellow or an orange color underneath. But those 5 marginal teeth are the way to tell. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about some of the monitoring we have done in Coos Bay. So here's our sample sites. We have annual sample sites. We sample each year. We also sample in other sites just to see what's going on, but these are the ones that we've sort of settled on to get long-term data to see what's happening in Coos Bay. We use different traps. So Fukui traps are large, call them fish traps. We'll see some pictures in a moment, but they are for trapping the adults, and we do that in the summer, usually June, July, and August when they're most active. Then we use minnow traps at the end of the year in September when we can start capturing the young of the year-old ones that are then only about 3 or 4 centimeters in size. But we can start capturing those in those traps. And so we look at young of the year and their size frequency distributions to sort of get at where they might be coming from. And so in some areas, we actually sample both as well, but you can see all the different trapping sites. Today, I'm just going to be talking about the Fukui trap data, the adult data. Next slide. So here's setting up some of those Fukui traps. There's Reagan and Jordan, two of our interns this year, over at our site called Empire Docks in the Empire area with a boat building center in the background there, and one of the boat ramps there. We set them up along the low tide, sort of the lower intertidal region. And so we capture them as they sort of come up into that area. There's a, like a lot of these fish traps, there's an opening on each side that is sort of a funnel. And so they can go in, but they can't come back out. And so we also use a bait canister in there with some tuna bait that we get over from Chuck Seafood. They have their extra tuna that they, when they cut off, we take that as bait and we use them in our crab traps. Next slide. So this is what the traps look like. They're quite easy to use and quite lightweight. They actually fold up. They're collapsible traps. You can see on one side, on the right side, there's a bunch of green crabs. And on the left side, we have a few Dungeness crabs. They are sort of medium size. One of the things you'll notice is that the Dungeness crabs do get larger than the green crabs. And so they can, in some of the areas where there's lots of Dungeness and red rock crabs, they are sort of repel or resist the invasion of the green crabs, especially in that sort of lower area of the estuary. Next slide. But it's also important to point out, here's a inside of a trap with a small Dungeness crab, a juvenile, way up in the upper right corner. And then there's all the green crabs. So at some stages, the Dungeness crabs are smaller than the green crabs, and their nursery sites, a lot of the nursery sites are up in the upper estuary. And so they come down through the green crab areas when they're maturing, and I think are vulnerable to these green crabs, especially as they increase in populations. Next slide. So here, once we get our crabs, we take them back to the lab, and we release all the native crabs in the field. And then we bring the green crabs back and we measure them and weigh them. And then we euthanize them using in our freezer. Next slide. So here's the data from 2002 to present. Along the x-axis is the year, the time, and then the y-axis is the green crab catch per unit effort. And that's basically the average of each average trap catch in Coos Bay for all these traps. And the number on top of each bar is the number of traps we put out for that year to get that number. And so you can see basically early on in 2002 to 2016 or so, these crabs, they were coming in, they're at small numbers, and they kind of came in and then kind of went possibly extinct and then came back in. But ever since 2016 or so, we've been seeing an increase in green crabs. And this year we've been out trapping. I was just out this morning actually. And some sites are about the same and some sites are higher than previously. The other thing to note here is that we sort of have there's impacts are different for any different species, but there's sort of a general rule of thumb that's being used by sort of experts around here. And that is about 10 crab are where you really start seeing some impacts from the green crabs. And the other thing to note here in this chart, this graph, is that there's also error bars on here, the standard deviation. And so as we get more and more crabs, we're also seeing greater deviations. That means that some traps have few crabs and some traps have lots of crabs, or some sites in this case. And so we're going to look at that next, look at the individual sites, 10 of the sites that we're using for our study. So next slide. So here's graphs for each individual site. Again, on the x-axis is time. I can't quite see the bottom there, but it's the same time period from 2002 or 2004 to 2020. And I have the other thing to notice here is that on the y-axis, it's a different scale. And so some of them only go up to about 1.5 crabs per trap, and some are going up to about 30. And so that's showing that all in the estuary, there's very different abundances or densities in different areas of the estuary. And that's important to note is that if you're sampling an estuary, and I happen to be sampling just at Empire Docks, I might think that there's not many green crabs there. But if I go over to Coos History Museum area or the Jonay Slough or Isthmus Slough, there's quite a bit more in that sort of mid-estuary region. For example, if you look at Jonay Slough there, one of the ones that's boxed in red, It doesn't look like there's a lot there. And last year there was about 5 or so per trap, but in June we went back there this year, and now there's 27 per trap in June. So it jumped right up to about the Coos History Museum amount, which is up almost 25 or 30 per trap. So in some areas we're quite a bit over that 10, that sort of one measure of impact at that 10. Next slide. So here's, I have in red circled, those are the areas that I just showed that are higher last year and this year: Coos History Museum, Isthmus Slough, and Joe Nay Slough. Until this year, there weren't many in South Slough. And so now this is kind of worrisome that one of our areas in South Slough is quite high and actually jumped up higher than the Coos History Museum, which had been the highest for several years. Next slide. So we can talk a little bit about potential impacts. Next slide. So what do they eat? Pretty much anything they can. They're omnivores. They'll eat decaying material too. It's probably a favorite thing of theirs, but they eat shellfish like clams, oysters, mussels, and scallops, anything they can pry apart or get into. They also dig for them as well into the sediment. They'll eat crabs, juvenile Dungeness crabs and shore crabs. And they'll also eat eelgrass, so they destroy eelgrass beds by digging them up. Bioturbation, it's called. So they're digging them up, trying to get at the clams and oysters and things underneath, well, not oysters, but the clams underneath in the beds and other things that are in that sediment. Another important thing is that in the East Coast, they found that the green crab caused the collapse of the soft-shell clam industry. They also reduced fish abundance by destroying eelgrass, and that's been found in a scientific study. And not only do they eat Dungeness crabs, and they compete with them for food, but they also compete for shelter space. And so they'll push small Dungeness crabs out of protected habitats, like under rocks or under materials that they're hiding under, which also increases their predation from other predators. There's a lot of different potential impacts that they have. They've been pretty widely researched, especially along the East Coast of the United States, since they've been there for quite a bit longer than the West Coast. Next slide. So here's an example of where a study that looked at eelgrass restoration and looked at the effect of green crabs on eelgrass restoration, something we're really interested in. And you can see, first of all, that density is what affects the impact of the crabs. And so it's called per capita impact, or the impact per crab. And when you go from 1 crab to 4 crabs in this study, they found that the number of eelgrass shoots damaged jumped quite high. So it went from very little for 1 crab to a lot at 4 crabs. And then successively increasing crabs, basically they just, it was a similar effect, even though it looks like it's going down. Statistically, those are the same, those last 3 boxes. So there is a potential to reduce the density, if we can, to below impact levels, or impact that we agree might be not too bad. So there's a potential to reduce numbers if we can. Next slide. We can also look at, from our data again, we also count the number of Dungeness crabs, for example, while we're counting the green crabs in our traps. So we can look again at how it might be affecting Dungeness by correlating these two and looking at them together. And so in this case, I've got the green crabs again in sort of the blue. I think I can't see the bottom of the slide again there, but that's also time across the bottom, similar as before. The blue is the green crabs, and the kind of reddish color there is the Dungeness crabs. And so what we're looking for here is areas where green crab, the blue is increasing, and the Dungeness are decreasing. Like Isthmus Slough is a good example, one of the boxed ones there. You can see Dungeness crab was high back when it was looked at several years ago. And then now it's declining as the green crab numbers are increasing. It's hard to tell with Coos History Museum because we don't have some good data on that. But Joe Nay Slough, you can see that Dungeness crabs are very volatile in they have recruitment years that are very, very high, and then they go down for the next year or the next several years. But it's very hard to make conclusions based upon this. But it'll be interesting to see this year at Joe Nay, for example, that jumped up to 27. The green crabs jumped way up. And out of we caught 170 green crabs there and only 2 Dungeness crabs. So they'll be way down this year, so far at least. And so this is the kind of data that we're looking at to figure out what the impacts are from the green crab on the other species that we're interested in, the beneficial species. Next slide. So what can we do for management? Eradication really isn't feasible. Like I said, they're coming in from outside our area. We can't stop them from coming in. Even if we were to be able to eradicate them and get rid of them, they would just come back on the tides. But managing abundance is possible. There's some work being done in California right now looking at managing abundance through sort of community citizen science groups. But to do that, we need to, one, understand the per capita impacts. We have to figure out how far we have to reduce those populations to have beneficial impacts. And finally, we also have to develop a sustained trapping program. So year by year, we need to be able to continue that in basically forever. As long as we want to reduce those impacts, we need to be able to continue that program to be able to do that. Next slide. So basically, that's the end of my presentation. Summary again, looking at these invasive green crabs. Remember, you can tell them by the 5 spines. They're increasing in Coos Bay, but they're also increasing in certain parts of Coos Bay more than others. They do have impacts. They will eat some of our important species, shellfish and crabs. And we do have a way of managing it if we can develop the program to do that. Next slide. And also just a reminder that a lot of this work has been done by a lot of people, especially Sylvia Yamada, who kind of started this program way back in the early 2000s. So we have this long-term data and also a whole lot of interns who have helped over the years to do all these, measure these crabs. In fact, I've still got a couple hundred crabs downstairs that I've got an intern waiting for me to come down and measure some crabs. So we definitely need these interns to help us do our work. All right, thanks, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, Sean. That was really an informative report. I wrote down a couple of comments. They certainly don't seem to be indiscriminate eaters. They munch on a lot of different valuable things that we need in the estuary. One of the things that occurred to me is when someone is out, someone from the public, not a commercial crabber, is out crabbing, do they know the difference besides, the fact they have 5 teeth, but do they know the difference? And what are they instructed to do when they come across green crabs? Do you know?
Yeah, well, ODFW is sort of in charge of those, the restrictions and what you do with those. Basically, in invasive species, you cannot put back in. It's illegal to put them back in, so you have to do something with it. They recommend killing the crabs either at the docks or whoever. I think their recommended way to do it is freezing. At least that's the way we use it, and I think that's commonly the best way to do it. You can take them to the ODFW office. They will accept them there. And whether or not everybody knows what they are, a lot of people I talk to do and a lot don't. So like this morning, I talked with some people out, actually, I guess it was yesterday morning, near Empire there, that photo I showed you. They just came out, they were looking for shellfish and they asked what I was doing. I talked about green crabs and I showed them the green crab and they didn't know about it, even though they were shellfish harvesting. So some people do. Last month, I talked with one of the shellfish, the person who owns some of the oyster plats in South Slough. And he definitely knew about them and was happy that we were doing something about them. And he said he killed them whenever he can. So yeah, I guess the answer to it is that some people know, some people don't. And you have to remove them and kill them somehow if you get them out of the water.
Well, I know in, my dog has something in his mouth he's not supposed to have. Ouch. What have you got? I know in Oregon, you now have to have a permit, I think a $5 permit, unless it's gone up to go crabbing. So I wonder if ODFW, when they issue those permits, have a little handout about the green crab. And if they don't, that might be something to do to educate more folks about just exactly what this thing is. Because actually, I didn't know, I might have missed it in the report. I did not know that they weren't always green. And so the only way to really tell them are by those 5 teeth. They're creepy little crabs. So I just think that might be helpful to talk with ODFW and see if they have any kind of literature campaign.
Yeah, well, Sea Grant used to have some really nice little brochures that you could hand out that were nice. And actually, we do crabbing seminars, workshops, you know what they call them, workshops, outreach. So Eric Dean, one of our outreach people, he does crabbing workshops where they do show green crabs. In fact, he asked me yesterday to make sure I had some on hand for his next crabbing event. So we do education through South Slough, but of course it's reaching a fairly small number of people probably. So we definitely could increase that.
Mm-hmm.
What we see is that red rock crabs are native and they're actually will help resist the invasion of green crabs, but some people think they're invasive. And so that's the other side of it, is that some people think a crab that is native is an invasive crab. We have high limits on it. I think you can take like something like 30 red rock crabs. And so one of the our students, intern, she did some work for us last year on looking at the predation, or actually, predation on green crabs by other crabs. And one of her findings or suggestions was that we try to preserve more red rock crabs to reduce the number of green crabs.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you said in your report, we can't stop the invasion, but we certainly can slow their expansion. So education is really a good opportunity to do that. Thank you, Sean. Let me open it up to anyone else for comment. And I think I see Maya's unmute button.
The obvious question I feel like I should know the answer to, but do people eat them? They're not a fishery in Europe, right? Are they worth eating, or is it just labor intensive to get enough meat out of small claws? It's not worth it.
Yes, people do eat green crab. I think Portugal and Sicily, I think, have some small industries for green crab. There is some thought that the problem is they're too small to get a lot of meat out of they only get about to 5 inches, 4 or 5 inches. But there is a potential for soft shell crab, like on the East Coast. And we have looking into that on how to figure out the molting behavior, because you have to figure out the molting behavior to have soft shell green crab available. So we kind of started looking into figuring out the molting. I was actually going to have an intern work on that, but we didn't get many molting in too short a period of time. So I think what I need to do is I need to do some research more long-term and figure out the molting patterns. So that's definitely potential if you could make it into an industry like soft shell crab industry, which is lucrative on the East Coast. Right. Get some groups here to trial that. That would be another potential way of making something into a economic benefit.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks. That was what I was kind of wondering, if there's a seasonal soft shell component that we could tap into. Cool. Thanks.
And I just want to jump in and add a couple anecdotes about the eating crabs, because when I had been crabbing as part of this project, I did meet people who knew what they didn't know what they were, but they were looking in the trap and they said, "What are those? They taste horrible." Like, people, when they cooked them up, said they were awful. Christina Geierman she's a teacher in the area that worked with us on a green crab project, and she had her culinary students try to cook them and try them in different ways, and they could not find a way that they liked them. And I think a lot of it is, if you have the opportunity to eat Dungeness crab or green crab, you're going to pick Dungeness every time. So it's not, I don't know how viable it is unless you can get very creative with your cooking techniques.
Thank you, Bree. Lonnie, I see your hand up. And then Chief, are you unmuted to speak? Okay. Okay. Right after Lonnie then.
Borrowing from the West's historic past, what about the idea of bounties? Remember, there used to be bounties on different. I mean, there's things that have gone extinct in the West, and we're now trying to reintroduce, like wolves and grizzly bears that basically were made extinct by bounties on them. So I'm just
True. I haven't really thought about that, but that probably would be an effective way to get people to remove the green crabs if you put a bounty on them, like per capita or for individuals. In fact, we also have Seacoast Compost has already agreed to take them for composting. So we have a place to put them if we could get enough. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. It would be interesting to know what that would do, like how much we'd have to have per crab to make it people go and get as many as they can.
Yeah, I'm thinking if there was just, you'd get a lot of kids probably interested, even at 50 cents or $1 a piece or something. For $100, you might easily all of a sudden have 100 crabs removed, and I'm just thinking like some kids say, hey, let's go down to Jonay Slough and make $100 by catching green crabs.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. I'm not sure where we get the funding from and how we'd be able to do it. Maybe it would be a potential FOSS thing. I don't know.
It sounds like a conversation with ODFW. Lonnie, your $100 for going out and getting crab reminds me recently, just last weekend, I asked my grandchildren, age 5 and 7, to go out and pick up all the apples that fell during the June drop. And I said, I'll pay you 10 cents an apple. Not thinking there were that many apples out there. There were 114. So it cost me, I think $11.75 because I rounded it up to 15. But it works. Money works sometimes. All right, Chief, I saw that you were wanting to ask some questions, so go for it.
Yeah, I was just wondering that these migrated from the England and that area. Is there no natural enemy or thing to take care of them, or how did they become so prevalent around the world?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And invasion ecology always, there's a lot of people asking that question. Why are they doing so well here? One of the common ways they do it is by leaving their predators and diseases behind and parasites. And we do know that there are fewer parasites on green crabs on the West Coast of the United States. And so it may be that they're freed from some of that predation, or from, I guess in this case would be parasitism, by moving to a new place. But we don't really know. I mean, one of the questions is, well, what's in that habitat here in the West Coast that they're invading? And that's these little shore crabs. We have a native shore crab, several of them, but they're much smaller. They're only a few centimeters in size. And so the green crabs are more aggressive and they grow larger. And they seem to fill that niche then that was for the smaller crab. So that's a good question. A lot of research goes into that. We don't really know why they do so well here and not as well in the European area.
Thank you.
Sounds like a lot more research. All right, I'm trying to look through here to see if anyone has a hand up or they're unmuted. I'm not seeing anyone else. So Sean, thank you so much for the presentation today.
Thanks.
All right, we will conclude with new business and move on to information reports. This is always a good time to find out what's going on at the South Slough, and administration and facilities is first up. So I suspect that's either Bree and or Rebecca.
That would be me. I just have a couple comments. Most of our updates are in the write-ups, but there's just a couple things I wanted to highlight that's happened in the last few months. The majority of my facilities and admin staff have continued to be in the office throughout all of the COVID closures. So even though we haven't had our visitor center open, it's been business as usual for them. So they've been trying to get a lot of projects done. The one thing that was just recently finished this week was part of our maintenance compound expansion. We just finished updating our current maintenance building with all new siding and new paint. It's nice and bright now. You don't realize how dirty the siding is and the paint is until you get all new, and it's like, wow, that's bright. So that's just completed. The other thing is we have our trails construction grant still ongoing, and we will have that for another year. So we're plugging away at updating our trails with new bridges and kiosks. We had animal-proof garbage cans start to go in over the last few months. And we also had the Hidden Creek 9 Bridge, which Bree showed in the beginning of her presentation on the economic contribution. That was part of it. And then also we recently completed the new transition from our North Creek Trail to the Tunnel Trail. That was always one area on our trail system that was kind of dangerous and really, really steep. And it kind of limited the people that could use it. So we recently, actually, I'm trying to think timing, it was April and May, we had our inmate crews and Coos Forest Patrol come out and assisted us with all the heavy labor involved in that. And it's totally rerouted and with an easier incline, decline so that more people can use it. And it's just an absolute beautiful area now. So if you ever get out on the trails, definitely check out the new transition there. And then the last thing is, as of July 1, our newest construction grant kicked in. And these are all NOAA funded grants that we have. This one here is going to renovate our public restroom at the visitor center to make it more ADA accessible. New automatic door openers for the majority of the entrances at the visitor center, and then also updating our exhibits. So we're starting the planning on that, and it'll be boots on the ground to try and get all that. It's a big project. We have 3 years to complete it. So we plan on having temporary restrooms put in by January, and then our public restrooms will be closed during the construction. So that's going to be starting real shortly. And the education team have already started their planning for updating the exhibits. So that's already in process as well. So busy, busy, busy for us. That's all.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I did note in the report also that the pole barn is now exceeding your expectation for expenses because the price of lumber is so sky high. Yep. So now you're looking at scaling it back to stay within your budget.
Yeah, and we're doing some problem solving around the budget issue with there. We reached out to our NOAA representative, Bree Turner, with some ideas. And so we're problem solving through that. We're hoping to be able to, we have quotes in place right now that we haven't accepted and started a contract on yet. But once we hear back from Bree Turner on where we're at with that, we will move forward with the contract. Hopefully by the end of August at the latest, so that construction can be done on time. So we did have to scale back a little bit, but we should still be able to get our needs taken care of.
Yeah, the price of lumber has really changed building homes and renovations a lot for folks.
It doubled from the quotes that we got when we wrote the original grant. Originally, it was give or take around 40,000 for the quote. And I always increase just because of inflation, about 10%. The first set of quotes we got on this project were in the $75,000 to $95,000 range. So we definitely had to scale back a little bit, but we're getting closer to within range and we just have to go through the processes now.
All right, great. Any questions of Rebecca about the facilities? All right, and really appreciate that 70% grant to DSL funded ratio. That when I first came on board, I think it was 64%. and now you're up to 70-30. So you're doing a great job pulling that.
It fluctuates every year based on what our needs are and what we're writing grants for, but we definitely do a lot of grant writing.
Yeah, and that's not easy work. So thank you.
Yep.
All right. We're going to move on to the education report. I believe Jamie will be giving that.
I'm here. So I think, I'm not sure, some of this may be a little bit of repeat from last time. Everything is in our report, but we resumed in-person programming in April. So that was probably like our biggest news, and everyone was really happy to do that. And we were able to have a handful of schools come out during the spring and hike on the trail, which was the only program we were offering fully outside, and smaller numbers than normal, but we did that. And we were able to visit some schools and do activities in their schoolyards or outside their schools, which was really nice. It's really great during the spring. And now we're into summer, so we have in-person programming during the summer as well. And I do think this was mentioned at the last meeting, but in addition to our normal summer camps that run every other week, the schools, a lot of schools in Oregon, maybe all of the schools in Oregon, got funding for summer programs. So we're assisting a lot of schools with pieces of their own summer programming. So we're pretty busy all the time. We have 2 college interns working with us. Both of them are doing hybrid versions of their internships. So they're with us for some of their time and then working remotely for some of their time. But we do really appreciate their help with it's a lot of work corralling those kids around. And we have a high school intern working with us as well. Like Bree mentioned, often the former campers become camp counselors as they get older. So this camper, or our intern, was a camper for 7 years before he joined us this summer. And then I think another thing that was really great was that we were able to have our teachers on the estuary workshop, which is a 3-day teacher workshop. It's a NOAA required task. And it was nice not to have to make all 3 days of those training virtual. We did a sort of hybrid thing for that, where we did our classroom work virtually, but we were able to go outside and do a lot of field work outside. And this workshop, we focused on local climate issues. So,
oh my goodness, those are really critical issues right now, with our drought and our fires and floods everywhere. I mean,
it was a great workshop, and it was happening while we were in the workshop in real time. So,
oh, wow, that's great. I know everyone is so excited, and the teachers really like that tote program. So thank you for teaching that. All right, any questions from anyone? Any of the commission members have questions? I'm looking through the list. All right, well, Jamie, thank you so much. We always appreciate what you and your program are doing. Next up, we have the Coastal Training Program. Sabra Common is going to talk about all the great things that she's been involved in despite the pandemic.
So since the last time we met, there have been 3 trainings, which brought us up to within the NOAA annual requirements within the fiscal year. So those were the follow-up training that was requested by Unclaimed Properties at DSL, a more detailed training around cultural resources. And I got a lot of really good feedback from the participants there, as well as a digital coast training for facilitating virtual meetings. And there was a training associated with the eDNA sample gathering for lamprey project that is happening at Slough. Deborah Rudd was the main instructor/leader for those trainings, but I'm following up with the professional audience in there, and yeah, so that counts as our 5 for the annual year. And I've already got quite a few trainings and webinars lined up for the next fiscal year. So that's chugging right along. I also chair the South Slough Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Some of our activities have slowed down a little bit for the summer because there's a lot of field work going on, but we are still moving along with the land acknowledgement information gathering process. The last tribe we are going to be meeting with is the Siletz tribe. And they're, after that, then we're going to begin a document review process, kind of official adaptation of the land acknowledgement process after we've had, incorporating the input we've had from the then 3 tribes that we've talked to, although these conversations have already spurred a lot of internal dialogue at South Slough around land acknowledgements and similar practices. So that's been a really fruitful exercise. Additionally, I'm mentoring a Halling scholar this summer that is looking at both through a management and policy review as well as interviews. She's looking at across the nationwide network of the NAIR system, how NAIRs are interacting with and partnering with Indigenous communities, the successes as well as the challenges that people are experiencing, kind of seeing who's had these practices for a while, who's just beginning, who might still be kind of trying to figure out how to go about it, and is going to be putting together a recommendation paper. And it's very timely considering that we are going to be looking at our management plan over the next year. And then one other thing that I wanted to bring up under technical assistance, we were approached by Oregon State Parks, specifically some state parks. There had been a canoe fragment surfaced in Sunset Bay a few years ago, unfortunately removed for about 72 hours from the water and sand area that had been in, was quickly recovered and went to OIMB for preservation in saltwater. It's been through a preservation process over the last few years. And usually these types of artifacts would be, since it was found on state parks land, would be going to a natural history museum at U of O, so a little bit more interior in Eugene, but several tribal staff here asked if it could be housed more locally, be more available to tribal members, including carvers. And we were on the short list. The South Slough Visitor Center was on the short list for where it might be housed. So we were able to have South Slough staff, park staff, the U of O museum staff, and tribal government staff all come together and talk through what it would take to house such an artifact at the visitor center. Came to an agreement, and we're still working through the agreements and high-level paperwork, but that artifact is at least going to initially be installed on the 21st in a temporary location. And then as the interpretive display area is revamped, we're going to be working around it and making sure that we incorporate it into our new interpretive narrative. So that was a big success that just kind of all worked out. That is, I think, everything that I was going to summarize for my report.
Thank you, Sabra. And my puppy has entered the room again and is causing me some issues. 2 days ago, he chewed through my laptop power cord right when I was in the middle of working on a presentation that was due the next day. Fortunately, I had a spare So if you do have puppies at home, make sure you have a spare of everything because they still chew. But anyway, I really appreciate that report, particularly the diversity, equity, inclusion, and the canoe fragment. I did speak with Bree about that today, that the display case has been built. So gonna wait and hopefully see if the temperature controlled climate will help. And the canoe was quite waterlogged when it was recovered, the canoe fragment, and there was some injection of something that to take the water out, and I'll do all of that and dry it back out to a place where it could be preserved. So I'm excited about it, and it's going to go right along with the redesign of the entire visitor center inside the education area to be more accessible and just more energetic. And this will really tell a little bit more about the history of the indigenous people in the area. So that's exciting, very exciting. Thank you.
Yep. Oh,
and let's see.
Size is the fragment. It's sorry, it was shown to me, so I'm trying to estimate. I think it's about 2.5 feet long by, gosh, maybe that tall. I've yet to see it in person, but the parks staff and the museum staff took a lot of really detailed measurements in order to build the case. So if Chris, if you really need the dimensions, I can look back on the email, but it's sizable. It's going to require quite a few people to move it from its current location at the Sunset Bay Park in a safe storage area to the visitor center. We've got quite a few people that said that they are willing to put some muscle power in there to help us move it. But it's definitely not anything near the size of a full canoe. It's definitely, the front helm-ish kind of size. But so not small, not large, but it's definitely not going to be walking off anywhere. We can definitely say that.
Chief, did you unmute yourself to have a comment about this? I know that all three tribes have been involved in the conversation about the preservation.
Yeah, I didn't catch which one that was, and that was the one down at Sunset, down at the creek.
Yes.
Comes in, yeah.
Yes. So it's been going through the preservation process for I think 4-ish years.
Yeah, I was going to say that some time ago that was located.
Yeah, so it's definitely the end of a very long process. And yes, Bree, thank you very much for bringing up those dimensions. So yes, we're just really glad that we were able to provide a safe and secure area that, both the public and tribal members who want to access it for their cultural uses will be able to access it very easily.
So we should be able to see this when we have our next meeting in person in November.
Yes.
Awesome. I'm excited about it. All right. Thank you so much, Sabra. Appreciate it. All right. Our next report is science and stewardship. That would be Sean and Alice. And Alice, I want you to make sure when you, I don't know if it's you or Sean, but I do want one of you to mention the Camas project because it was pretty exciting to see the results of that. And Chief Brainerd's tribal government donated those. In fact, Chief, you might have donated some yourself. I know you were going to.
Yeah, I dug a bunch up. I don't know if they use them or not. They come from my field right here on Camp Creek, but I don't know if that's the same species that grows there on the coast.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to seeing if Sean or Alice can shed some light onto that. So Sean, do you want to start out?
Yeah, I'll start out. Although I think Alice will be giving the update on the Camas, though. So I have to wait for that. So yeah, I talked about the green crabs. Another interesting project we've been working on is the eDNA lamprey project, which is a citizen science project. You've had an update on that, I think, last meeting or the meeting before that. What's interesting this year, is we're running it again this year, is that we've had a lot of natural resource managers who are becoming part of the project, who are interested in using the data for primarily barriers, understanding barriers to lamprey movement. So we have some folks from, that's the Oregon Department of Forestry, from U.S. Bureau of Land Management, the Confederated Tribes of Coos Lower Umpqua Indians, Wild Rivers Land Trust, and even ODFW was interested in smallmouth bass, using it for smallmouth bass. So we've got a lot of interest from the natural resource professionals using this technique. And so I know that both Sabra and Jamie, Jamie and maybe Deborah, have been talking about how to do some trainings on that. So that's been interesting development this year. In the past, we've had just primarily the citizen scientists from the community, but not the sort of the natural resource manager interest. We're also looking at another interesting project that's part of our NEARS Science Collaborative. It's the ecological and social metrics for marsh restoration. And so what they're looking at is how ecological measures of successful marsh restoration match with the public's and natural resource managers' perception of what successful marsh restoration is. And so it's a hybrid ecological and social science project that's currently kind of in the middle. So we'll know more about that next year, what their findings are. But it should help us communicate the benefits of marsh restoration better to the public and to natural resource managers. Allie has been doing work on eelgrass restoration, monitoring the eelgrass restoration, and also has a student, an intern, Reagan, who's looking at eelgrass sediments under eelgrass restoration sites. So we have a lot of interns this time of year. And so basically all the research staff have an intern who's working with them on various projects. I have an intern, Jordan, who's working on green crabs and intra-specific predation, sort of cannibalism of green crabs and how that might affect regulation of green crab populations. And Jenny, who is looking at restoration sites, she has an intern, Petra, who's looking at the soil types in restored and reference wetlands to see how the soil is different in those areas. So that's kind of a brief summary of some of the highlights of what we've been doing. And the rest of it's in the packet. So I'll rest with that and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Sean. I had read that about, I think Petra's working on the Anderson Creek monitoring, which is a restoration project in 2002. And we're coming up on a 20-year look back to see about its success. So that'll be exciting to find out how successful it's been on restoring the wetland, and what techniques have proven to be more worthwhile than others. So I noticed with the increase in the interns and the volunteers, now that COVID has subsided somewhat, we have the opportunity to bring these folks in and can really help them, and they can help us. I know that all of you find those interns are valuable to the work that you do. And we couldn't do what we do at the South Slough without our thousands of hours of volunteers either. And that was noted in the research report on the economic study as well. So thank you, Sean. Any questions of Sean before I move on to Alice?
Well, thanks, Vicky, for giving me a heads up on the camas trial.
Well, so, I know the chief was interested in that, and so was I. And I saw the report in here that it was pretty successful, actually, if I'm reading it correctly.
Yeah. So we planted 130 bulbs. John Schaefer donated these particular bulbs, and we had 3 different varieties or populations that we were trialing. A population from Cape Arago out at the point there, the common and the greater camas as well. And so out of the 130 bulbs, we actually found 110 plants. So that's around 84% of those plants emerged. And I've got to tell you that when camas comes up, you know, after 1 year after planting in the bulb, and these bulbs are not large, the little shoots are pretty small. And then when it's in amongst a lot of other grass, they're actually pretty challenging to find. So I was impressed that we found 84% of them. So that was great that they actually survived their first winter and emerged. We did have around 18% of the bulbs that were not protected from deer browsing were browsed. And then we used a natural product called Plant Skid to spray on bulbs. As the shoots emerged, we sprayed it on them, and that dropped the browsing down to about 6%. And so we were, I guess, kind of surprised that the browsing wasn't higher, because this is in a really heavily browsed area, and camas is quite popular with deer. And so what we're hoping to do is survey these population again next spring and just see how this population is actually going, and how much the impact of the deer we're having on it, before we decide whether or not this is a suitable site for establishing a camas meadow. And then we would definitely be, if that's the case, we'll definitely be reaching out to other folks to help guide the management of this and get more bulbs involved in that. So we're sort of holding off on our decision till next spring.
I didn't think there was anything deer didn't eat. At least my neighbors, I live in North Eugene, and my neighbors in South Eugene are always complaining about the deer eating everything in their yard and their garden. So camas must be in their diet as well.
Yeah. And then we did have 2 plants that flowered, and there was some yellowing of plants, and this could have just been through, you know, stress, because we planted them quite late after they had a little bit of a shoot already coming off it. Before I go on with a couple of other things, did anyone have any questions about that trial?
Yes, Chief Rader, Doc and I planted some that I brought down from here, and planted them out at Gregory Point, and they grew quite well, except for the moles. The moles got them. I was wondering if you had any problem with that.
Not that we noticed. Yeah, not at this site.
But there's a huge population of moles there on Gregory Point, so I
did have a look around. Like I said, you know, the bulbs themselves weren't sort of browsed, because we found most of them coming up, and didn't see a lot of moles around the area, but it's something to keep an eye out for, definitely.
But the moles don't bother them here, but the ground here is hard as rock. I don't know how they even grow, but they do.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Chief. Alice, what else have you got in your bag that you have been working on?
Sure. I thought I'd let you know about the purple loosestrife mapping and removal. That's a continuing project out at the Barview State Wayside area at the mouth of South Slough. So this is a very small population of purple loosestrife that reserve staff, interns, and volunteers have been mapping and managing for a number of years now. We went out just a couple of weeks ago, and there still is a population out there, but we're pulling them before they flower, before they set seed, in the hopes that we can still have the chance of eradicating this population. And we didn't find any really large plants, which is what we've seen in the past. So they're sort of younger, new recruits. So it's a continuing effort, and hopefully we can keep that under control and not let it spread into the South Slough. I wanted to also note we've established a Trail Stewards program, and this is a collaborative program across within the reserve with facilities and outreach and stewardship staff. And so Deborah and Jonathan have been amazing at developing this program. And Jonathan is the one leading the training of the Trail Stewards program. So he has trained 9 volunteers so far. The purpose of this program is to just really assist us with trail maintenance, but also invasive species removal along the trails and picking up trash and just keeping our trails really beautiful and welcoming to the public. And we also want to use these volunteers to create a positive presence on the trails so that people don't feel isolated and alone and at risk on the trails, that there are people out there that can help them and support them and answer questions. So we're really excited about that program, and we're really just trying to build it up. And we are planning a joint program with the Oregon Trail Keepers statewide program as well. So hopefully we can get their volunteers involved in this program. The other thing is we are working really hard with my Hollings intern, Anna Liang, who is here for the summer, and we are traipsing all over the forest, putting in new permanent forest plots. And so this is so that we can better understand and track the changes in the forests in the reserve, especially with our upcoming WASN management, and also looking at wildfire risk and forest resiliency. So we have around 63% of our managed lands are in the forests, and very low representation in our surveys and monitoring at the moment compared to our estuary, which is just really well studied. So that's been a great experience for us as well. And Sean just asked me to give a quick update on the Western lily population. So each year we go out and survey the Western lilies, and we have been finding that this population is increasing, and we are getting a greater number of flowering plants and vegetative plants in here. And again, we're trialing a deer protection method with this population as well, which seems to be helping with deer browsing. I don't have those stats in front of me, but that population is the largest known population of Western lily. And we're certainly doing our best to protect it and monitor it and work to restore it. And I think that's about it from me, unless there's questions.
Oh, we have the largest population of the Western lily here in South Slough.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I think that you have spoken to that before, and that'd be great to learn more, see what the progress is being made on that. That's exciting. Oh my gosh. I wanted to point out, you mentioned one of your interns on page 49 in your packet, everyone, is a list of the interns. And on page 50, committees and work groups, all the staff, it's incredible to see where they're all plugged in to work on work groups, both in the state, in the county, in the city, and nationally. So do take a look at how active the staff has become or has always been, and is just now in the notebook for me to see. So thank you very much. And Alice, your presentation today, as always, was great. Let me do a quick check and see if anyone is unmuted to ask a question. I don't see any today, but we look forward to seeing you in November. All right, now we're going to finish up with our last information report, which is the Friends of South Slough, and I didn't see them present today.
No, so Christine Moffett, president, and Todd Buchholz, vice president, usually attend. Todd is away on a fire assignment protecting people from wildfires, so we appreciate his service doing that. Christine is also incredibly tied up today and could not come. But I wanted to note that we included the support they've been providing for the acquisition in your packets. And then a few other things they've been working on is to help administer 2 grants. One's from the Pacific Power Foundation to support an AmeriCorps position. We recently received notification of funding for that, or FOSTED. So they'll be administering those funds. And then they're also administering funding from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for the WASN restoration project for upland forest work for that. They've also this year, because of COVID restrictions, we've had a lot of our interns and volunteers driving separately. So FOSS got together really quickly a method to allow reimbursements for those folks, so they're not paying for those costs on their own. So we really appreciate their help with that. And then the other big focus area for them is reopening our bookstore when we open the visitor center. So they've been very busy with the inventory, getting a new system set up for the cash register, and they will be ready to open the doors on September 1st. So big thank you to FOSS for all of their help.
Yes, I would say we couldn't do our work there without the support of FOSS. I mean, we could, but it'd be very difficult. They provide funding, financial support, and also technical support and volunteer support. And I did not know they were reimbursing volunteers for gas. So that's great. That's terrific. We will look forward to hearing more from them in November. So any questions of Bree about the FOSS report? I know my grandchildren will be glad when the bookstore reopens because Grandma always buys things for them. And their estuary t-shirts are getting too small because the children keep growing tall. So hopefully we'll have some t-shirts for young people.
Did you see Lonnie's shirt? He's representing. It's great.
No, Lonnie, what are you wearing? Oh, there you are. Explore your estuary. There you go. My grandkids love their shirt. Okay, well, that does it for information reports. I will close that out. Our next item is the next scheduled meeting, and right now it is scheduled for Thursday, November 18th, 2021. So we're going to close out the year in person. Sometimes, and that's at 1:00 p.m. Sometimes that gets changed because my schedule gets a little bit crazy or we don't have a quorum. But at this point, please mark your calendars for November 18th, and we look forward to seeing you then. So before I take a motion to adjourn, do we have any comments? I see Lonnie with his hand up.
Yes. Well, as you know, we've been full-time RVing for several months since April, and our house that we're having built in South Carolina is going to be finished in a couple of weeks. So it looks like that's the first step in us becoming South Carolina residents, is to actually have a house here. And so I'm thinking that probably by November, we might be official South Carolina residents, or at least sometime before the end of the year. And I'm not sure but how that affects me serving on the commission, but I think that don't I have to be a Oregon resident to serve on the commission? That's what I thought. So I was just giving you guys a heads up that it looks like by the next meeting or around about that time, Laura and I will be residents of South Carolina.
Giving up your nomad status.
Yes, well, Laura is not really keen on full-time RVing without any end in sight. So
I don't blame her one bit. There's not enough closet space.
Well, yeah, but I would like to say that, we have been surviving and are going on, we've got over 40 years, getting closer to 50 years of marriage, and it's survived being in an RV for months and months and months on end. So I think that speaks to somebody's tolerance.
Oh, I think so. And my husband and I celebrated 46 years of marriage this June, just last month. So You know, we're in a small club, Lonnie, so congratulations. And what part of South Carolina will you be taking up residence?
They call this the upstate area, which is Anderson is the city, and it's like the it's the northwest corner of South Carolina.
Right next to Georgia.
Right, we're about an hour from the Georgia border. Not even. So,
All right, well, you don't have to drive far to get that Georgia peach then, right?
yeah, well.
And we're near Bowler Coast.
Yeah, most importantly, we're on the same coast as all our relatives now.
Oh, well, that is important.
And
I was on, my daughter and her husband, my husband, all went to vacation on Defusky Island in South Carolina a couple of years ago. And it was beautiful. And we drove from Alexandria, Virginia, down to South Carolina, and it was a beautiful drive.
It's beautiful here, and but I have to tease the local people. They talk about all the beautiful forest, and I say, "Where's the forest?" And they say, "Well, right there. Look at all those trees." And I say, "Oh, in Oregon, we call those twigs."
Yeah, it's like when my daughter lived in Nevada for a little while, we hiked to a waterfall, and it was a trickle, like someone had left the shower on just a little bit. And I'm like, and we have Multnomah Falls. So it's all relative to where you live, certainly. Chief, I see you turned your mute button off. What do you had to add to this conversation?
My son was a commander at a base back there in South Carolina, and that humidity there is a killer.
Yeah. That was one of the things that we contracted with the builder. I said, I need to talk to the guy who's putting in the HVAC system, because I say I already researched and found a whole house 70 pint dehumidifier, so that it can pull out, like several 5-gallon buckets of water a day out of the air. And we have one in our motorhome, that it's actual, it's got like a 2-gallon reservoir. We empty that 3 times a day.
Good.
That's in an 8-foot wide, 40-foot long motorhome. That's like, 5 to 6 gallons of water a day pulled out of the air.
People that haven't experienced that just don't realize how tough that is. You can't hardly walk a block and you're tired.
Yeah, no, and the only thing that is similar is like being in a Turkish bath.
Exactly.
It's that humid,
All
No,
right.
it's not as bad as Florida, though.
Or Washington, D.C., I might add.
Yeah, D.C. is bad too. Oh.
Yeah. All right. Well, Lonnie, thank you for giving us a heads up. If you do, in fact, become a South Carolina resident before our meeting, do let us know. Since we know that's going to ultimately happen for you, we will be looking for a replacement to fill your seat at some point. So thank you for giving us the heads up, and we really appreciated your involvement on the commission. It's been great serving with you. All right, I don't see any other persons unmuted for comments, so I will take a motion to adjourn, and that is not debatable, so I'll take a motion in a second.
Motion to adjourn.
And Lonnie, did you second that?
Yes, I did.
All right. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Lonnie. All those in favor of adjourning this great meeting. I told you it would be a great meeting today, but it has to come to an end. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. Okay. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you in November.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.